First, let us define logic. Logic can be defined as a study of arguments. It studies how arguments are constructed, what makes an argument good or bad. To give a brief meaning of arguments, arguments are passages that tries to prove something or that try to support some point of view or statement with evidence. Thus, the task of logic is to study the nature of such kind of passages, how they affect our communication, how they affect our discovery of truth. Logic can also be defined as theory of reasoning. There are different theories, there are different philosophical thoughts about arguments, types of arguments, the value of arguments, the nature of arguments, and how arguments should be applied in philosophical, scientific, and everyday activities. Logic is also considered as a science because it is not a mere analysis of language, it's not a mere analysis of arguments, rather it tests the nature, the application of arguments in intellectual inquiries, especially in scientific inquiries. Scientific methods are constructed on a logical basis. Therefore, as a science, it studies how scientific theories, scientific experiments, scientific justifications can be grounded on logic, and how logic should be applied in empirical studies. Logic is a branch of philosophy, which is a parent discipline for other similar sub-branch like metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. Philosophy is a comprehensive discipline that tries to answer fundamental human questions like, what is this existence about? What is this existence made of? Where did this existence emerge from? How do we know anything for sure? What is the true authority or source of knowledge? How can we be confident that we know something? And what's the difference between knowing, believing, and what are the different sources of knowledge? And also, what is the value of questions like the value of anything, the value of life, the value of human, the value of right or wrong actions, the value of good or bad actions, the value of government, the value of institutions, the value of arts, the value of beauty. Questions concerning what values play, what values have role in human life are philosophical questions. In addition to that, philosophy also asks if reason can be a reliable source of knowledge or a reliable authority to test the validity of our knowledge. So logic is covered in this broad discipline called philosophy. As a branch of philosophy, it takes inputs from other branches mentioned, and it also serves as a tool to study those sub-branches in other branches of philosophy. Under philosophy, there are branches like metaphysics, which focuses on existence, epistemology, which focuses on the study of knowledge, axiology or value theory, which studies value, and thus logic, reasoning. Now let us discuss arguments. Argument, as I have already said, is a passage that contains statement in which evidence is provided for a certain conclusion. So, an argument is a sum of statements. Two or more statements makes an argument. Among these statements, one or more can provide evidence, and only one can be considered as a conclusion or a following of these evidences. When we are discussing, talking with our friends to convince on some point of view, we are usually making arguments. However, simply quarreling, disagreeing, and shouting over a topic doesn't make our speech or writing an argument. What makes it an argument is that it has some sort of structure in which we are attempting to provide evidence. Our evidence may not be strong, may not be sufficient, or it may not even have significant support, but if we are trying to justify our point of view with some statement, with some evidence, then we are making arguments. Argument is also sometimes called inference, so we can use the word inference interchangeably with arguments. But inference is a little bit different from argument because it is the atomic element of argument, or it's the atomic essence of argument. Simply, inference is the reasoning process expressed in an argument, or the reasoning process of an argument. In an argument, we may have a bunch of statements explaining the evidence, justifying the evidence, but what we are trying to make can be simplified, and that simplified content of reasoning is inference. Argument is a sum of premises and conclusions. Premises are those statements that try to provide evidence, whereas conclusion is that statement which tells us what is being proven in the argument. Let us say example. Berhanu is a genius because he can solve difficult math problems. This is an argument because this passage is trying to prove that Berhanu is a genius. It is trying to prove that Berhanu is a genius. But if it is an argument, it should try to provide evidence, as I said. What is the evidence here? evidence is that he can solve difficult problems. So if he can solve difficult maths problems, he is most likely to be a genius. So there is some attempt to prove that he is a genius. In this passage, the first part that is Brahanu is a genius is a conclusion, whereas statement after the term because is the premise. This word because is called indicator. So it indicates the premise. We'll discuss what indicators are and what types of indicators are there in an argument. And one reminder should be mentioned here that a conclusion of a simple argument should be one, but premises can be more than one. What makes an argument good and what makes it bad? Simply, an argument is good if the supposed premise actually supports the conclusion. If there is substantial ground to accept the premise as evidence to make the conclusion, then the argument is good. If there is certainty based on the evidence, or if there is a likelihood of accepting the conclusion based on the evidence, then the argument is good. But if the alleged evidence does not provide sufficient support, or if there is some disorder of the manner the argument or the evidences are provided, then that argument is considered as bad argument. So it is usually related with how strongly the evidence supports the conclusion. We can see good and bad arguments with examples. Brahanu is a genius because he got A grades in all the courses for his maths degree. In this, we are trying to justify that Brahanu is a genius. What is our evidence? Evidence is that he got A grades. Now, usually, someone who gets A grades in all courses is considered as a genius. So there is a strong ground here to accept the conclusion. Therefore, the argument is a good argument. Let's see the next one. Brahanu is a genius because his mother says so. We are trying to conclude that Brahanu is a genius. What is our evidence? His mother's statement that he is a genius. His mother is not a reliable authority, or the opinion of his mother is not convincing enough to accept that he is a genius. Therefore, this argument is a bad argument. We have defined argument as a group of statements. Let us clarify what statements are. A statement is a sentence that can be evaluated as true or false. If you can say the information of the statement as true or false, then that sentence is considered as a statement. It is a declarative type of sentences. There are questions, proposals, exclamation types of sentences, but the declarative one is what is considered as a statement. We can use the word proposition interchangeably with a statement, but like inference is different from argument, proposition is also slightly different from statement. as inference is the reasoning content, the filtered reasoning content of an argument. Proposition is also the filtered, the elementary content of the statement that makes the statement true or false. So a statement can have a chunk of words, expressions, phraseologies, and one assertion of fact can be expressed in different ways. We can have 5 statements expressing the same thing, and that same thing which makes all those sentences similar is the proposition. So it is basically what makes those statements true or false. So it's a matter of expression, matter of grammar, matter of convenience that differentiates them. But usually we use it interchangeably with statement to make the communication simpler. Let's see some sentences here. Ethiopia is located in Eastern Africa. Food relieves hunger. Artists are passionate about their works. Can we say this statement, this sentence is true or false? Yes. Ethiopia is located in Eastern Africa. True. Food relieves hunger. True. Artists are passionate about their works. True. So we can evaluate these statements as true or false based on our level of information and based on our level of awareness. But questions, proposals, suggestions, commands, and exclamations are not statements. We may exclaim about something, "What a beautiful day." We cannot say this true or false. Shut the door. This is a command. We cannot say true or false. I suggest you leave early to work. This is a suggestion. We cannot say this true or false. I advise you that you take the exam. This is an advice or a proposal. Should we go to school today? This is a question. So such sentences are not statements, and we don't need them in construction of arguments, but we can rephrase them and we can take some information from them to infer about certain topic. So the next topic is indicators. In arguments, we usually use phrases or words that serve to connect or serve as a conjunction of the conclusion and the premises. We use words like because, therefore, to connect conclusion and premise. Such words can help us to indicate or identify the conclusion and the premise. Let us see some phrases that can help us indicate or identify the conclusion. Therefore, wherefore, thus, consequently, we may infer, accordingly, we may conclude, it must be that, for this reason, so, hence, it follows that, implies that, as a result, are conclusion indicators. Any statement that comes after these phrases is a conclusion of an argument. Today is Friday, therefore tomorrow is Saturday. The word therefore comes before the statement tomorrow is Saturday. It indicates the conclusion. Premise indicators. There are also phrases that indicate the premise of an argument, at least one of the premise of an argument. Since, as indicated by, because, for, in that, may be inferred from, as, given that, seeing that, for the reason that, inasmuch as, owing to, are phrases that indicate premises. Any sentence that comes after such phrases is the premise. We can say, or we can argue, the premise argument in a different way by using premise indicator. Because today is Friday, yesterday is Thursday. Because indicates the evidence that today being Friday proves that yesterday was Thursday. So when there are premise indicators and conclusion indicators, it makes it easier to identify to identify the premise and the conclusion. An argument with indicators is said to have an explicit inferential claim. So the reasoning process is obvious. It is obvious that there is argument. But it doesn't mean that a passage that contains these phrases is always an argument, but it is likely that a passage is an argument when such phrases exist. When the argument doesn't have these indicators, just for sake of convenience or out of ease of expression, one may not use indicator terms. In this case, we have to ask ourselves, what is the central point of this argument? What is this argument trying to prove? When we ask this question, we will find the conclusion, and then we can ask which statements try to provide justification, evidence for this statement. We can find the premise. Such an argument is considered as having implicit inferential claim. So there is no obvious indication of inference, but implicitly, when we scrutinize the passage, we discover that it is an argument. I have been using the phrase inferential claim. Inferential claim is derived from the word inference. So an inferential claim is just an indication that the argument has inference, or the argument or the passage have some reasoning content, some justification, some attempts to prove something. And one more reminder is that there can be some statements that are neither premise nor conclusion in an argument. In our writing or in our speech, we may add some passing comments, facts, related content that's not necessary or significant to the proving process. I can say, I like Friday. Today is Friday, therefore tomorrow is Saturday. Statement I like Friday, or if I say Friday is the 5th day of the week, has nothing to do with the argument. It just is passing comment. So we have to be careful not to take identification of premise and conclusion as mutually exclusive. Until now, we have discussed the meaning of logic and what study is about. We have discussed arguments, bad and good arguments, elements of argument, that is premise and conclusion, statements, and indicators of premise and conclusion. If logic is all about these basic concepts, what is the need for learning these concepts? We can mention at least 3 main benefits of learning logic. Logic helps us identify between good and bad arguments. Whenever we are debating, whenever we are listening to the media, whenever we are reading, whenever we are observing some exchange of controversial topics, we can detect which one is a good argument, which one is a bad, which one is supported by evidence, which one pretends to be based on evidence. These days, there is a lot of overflow of information on the social media and in different platforms. We are exposed and we are influenced by them. If we are equipped with the basics of argument, we can easily differentiate which one is good and which one is bad. Logic can also help us be confident in our intellectual positions. As we go on learning and amassing lots of information, we may have difficulty of taking position, but if we use logic appropriately, we can discriminate between theories, claims, points of views that are supported by convincing evidence and those that are not. So it helps us defend our position, our intellectual positions, our theories, and our findings if we are making research. In our everyday life, logic can help us to resolve conflicts over controversial issues. We may have situations in which we have to convince our friends, colleagues, or even authorities on some matters that are interest to us. If we are equipped with arguments, we can easily present our evidence and we can counter attack allegations based on evidence. Of arguments and statements. Before concluding this lesson, let us discuss some non-argumentative passage. Knowing arguments, the nature of arguments, is the fundamental knowledge we should have. But knowing those passages that are not argument will ease the burden of finding out a passage inferential nature. So let us see some basic non-inferential or non-argumentative passage which are not arguments but which have some sort of inferential content, which can be rephrased to make an argument but which are not actually arguments. The first one is warning. Warning is not an argument. For example, if someone says, be careful when you take the stairs so that you don't fall. Here, there are two statements: be careful when you take the stairs and you don't fall. And there is some connector here so that connects these two statements. And there is some inferential relationship between if you are not careful, you will fall. But this is not an argument because the intent of this argument is not to prove something, to justify something, rather to warn. So it is not an argument. Advices are not also arguments. Someone may advise you should follow the procedures to avoid mistakes. So following the procedure can be used as evidence that one can avoid mistakes, but the intent of this is not to prove, rather it is just to advise someone on this matter. So we can rephrase it and make the passage an argument, but as it is, doesn't have a force of proving anything. Beliefs and opinions. When we express our beliefs or opinion about something, it is not an argument. I think or believe that Ethiopia's green policy will prevent environmental degradation. So there is some inferential content here. If Ethiopia is following a green policy, therefore this will prevent environmental degradation. But the intent, the manner of this passage is to express one's belief, not to justify that environmental degradation can be prevented. Reports are also an inferential passage. There is an ongoing debate about global warming. Scholars, environmental activists, and media outlets are giving lots of emphasis about issues concerning global warming. As a journalist or someone may tell what he has observed. His reporting is not proving anything. We can report even the argument of another person, but still it cannot be an argument. Explanations are usually difficult ones because they use the phrase because or since. The eyes face difficulty of seeing in the light immediately after leaving a dark room because the tissues that enable us see in the darkness cannot do so in the light. So this passage is explaining that the eyes face difficulty when they are exposed to light after being in dark for a while. On the basis of the fact that there are tissues that serve vision in darkness, but that cannot serve in light, unless other issues that can help us see are activated. So it's explaining why the eyes face difficulty. It's not proving that the eyes face difficulty. Such passages are not easily to categorize. The main question we have to ask is that, is this passage stating some matter of fact, or is it trying to prove something? If it's telling an obvious fact, which we as an audience know, then it is explaining why. But if it is trying to prove something that needs justification, then it is an argument. In general, there is no easy way to demarcate a clear boundary between arguments and non-arguments. But the main approach is to ask ourselves if this argument, if this passage is trying to prove something, or if it is not, if it has an intent or not. With this, we conclude our lesson of the first part of basic concepts of logic. In the coming lesson, we will discuss types of arguments. There are deductive and inductive arguments. We will see what differentiates them and how they are used in making assertions about our claims. Until then, goodbye.